It's no secret that Alberta is a major agricultural source in Canada. Now, we always try to celebrate many of our farmers, including some of the younger ones. Each year, a young farmer becomes the recipient of the Alberta Northwest Territory region of Canada's Outstanding Young Farmers Program. And this year's recipient is Ben Campbell, owner of a cattle ranch in Black Diamond. Ben and his family are advocates of farming and ranching right here in Alberta. Ben, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me.
Now, first of all, congratulations on the big award. What does this honor really mean for you?
Well, it's great because I'm a newcomer to agriculture, so I really had no expectation of winning the award. It was a huge surprise, and it really shows, I think, how welcoming the ag industry is to newcomers and how accessible it is for some people to get into.
So, Ben, what made you decide to go into agriculture to begin with?
I actually had an engineering degree and a job as an engineer working in the oil sands, but it wasn't really my passion. I wanted to do something that I thought was good for the environment, something that gave back to my community, and something that was a better fit for me personally, like working outside and being my own boss. And a friend of mine told me about grazing cattle as a way to meet kind of all those things, that they could be good for the environment. I was actually a vegetarian in university, and I didn't think that cattle were good for the environment, and I tried to limit my meat as much as I could. So totally changed all of that around.
So how do you feel about some government officials saying that cattle are not good for the environment because of all of the methane that comes out of them? What are your thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, like blanket statements. The only blanket statement that's true is that blanket statements are not true, which is, their cattle can be great for the environment if they're managed properly, and cattle can be bad for the environment if they're managed poorly. Methane that comes out of them is part of the natural carbon cycle. Methane is a carbon molecule. And so before there were cattle, there were bison, there's elk and deer and all these different ruminants. And ruminants are a necessary keystone species on grasslands. So methane that's cycled is also absorbed. It has like roughly a 10-year lifespan in the atmosphere. And so we have sort of a biological allowance for that. So I'm fine with that. It fits in with the natural cycle.
Can you give us a bit of an idea of why family farming is so important to Albertans?
Oh, I don't know. It's hard to hard to give one reason, but I mean, community is huge. I mean, it keeps rural communities alive. Employment, agriculture is a huge business. I think it's really valuable to have owner-operator farms where the person that owns the land and makes the business decisions also lives on the land and works on the land, as opposed to a pension fund owning land and hiring a manager to run it. I think that really the owner operator system keeps people and the communities alive.
Now, you're located near Black Diamond here in Alberta. Do you feel that in your area there may be some different issues in raising cattle as compared to, let's say, regions around Lethbridge and Medicine Hat?
Yeah, I mean, we're all facing the same sort of thing with heat and drought. I mean, that's challenging us here too. Something that's probably unique to this area is how big we are to such a big city, although Lethbridge and Medicine Hat are big enough. But I mean, I'm competing when I look to buy or rent land. I'm competing against people who are stockbrokers or lawyers or dentists. So the land is not really priced on its agricultural value anymore.
So how do you really compete with the bigger players?
You have to use the value of the land. So part of the value of our land is that it's in close proximity to Calgary. So we sell direct market beef, pork, and eggs into the city of Calgary direct to consumers. So people can go on our website and buy something from us, and then we deliver it into Calgary. So we're using sort of that value as being a local producer of food.
Now, one of the criteria for this award is making the most of your income from on-farm sources. With all we're hearing about inflation costs, has this on-farm income become more of a challenge for you?
On-farm income is very variable. It changes so much from year to year. This year has been a really good year for cattle prices. They've gone up. Grain prices are way up. So a lot of farmers actually did really well the last 2 years. But yeah, it just depends on a lot of the different constraints that we have. But the last 2 years financially have been pretty good.
Now, Ben, how about inflation? How much has it really impacted your business?
I mean, because we sell an end product to consumers, our product costs more because of inflation now. Because we set our own prices, we have a bit of a safety net. So when our costs go up, we increase our prices proportionally. So it hasn't affected sales yet, because you can only increase the price so much to cover your costs before you start impacting sales. But so far, we're doing okay. We sell out quite often, and we haven't raised our prices in about 5 years. So far, I would say inflation hasn't been a huge concern for us.
How about the carbon tax? Has it much impact on your business?
No, we have no impact from the carbon tax really. Farm fuel like gasoline and diesel is exempt from the carbon tax, and we're pretty input. We try to limit our inputs. We're try to be a nature-based, low overhead business, so we don't have a lot of costs from stuff like that. There's a solar grant out and a solar loan, so you can get a loan to cover the cost of solar panels. And then there's a grant that I think it covers like a quarter of the cost. So we're actually installing solar panels on the farm this month to make our farm completely net zero for electricity.
So, Ben, before you decided to get into the agriculture business, did you do some research to see about how farming and ranching has maybe changed over the years and how it can be profitable for you and your family?
Yeah, I mean, I came into agriculture knowing literally nothing. The first book that I bought was Raising Beef Cattle for Dummies, those black and yellow dummies books. So, I mean, I literally knew nothing. I knew nobody in agriculture. I got the Canadian Angus Breeders Association directory online and started cold calling people and asking if they would be willing to give me advice. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time learning, and I went through a formal mentorship program called the Cattlemen Young Leaders Program, and got a mentor through that program to learn about how to direct market beef and how to raise beef cattle and how to use stock dogs and low stress livestock handling. And I've spent a huge amount of time and money on learning.
I have a friend of mine out by Pinoca who raises a lot of black Angus, and he said they're very popular. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, Black Angus are that's probably one of the most popular breeds. There's for our direct marketing, we try to use smaller frame cattle, so we're often using Angus and Hereford cattle.
What other breeds are we talking about? Outside of, I guess, maybe some of the dairy cows.
Simmental, Charolais are probably two of the biggest. Others outside of Angus and Hereford.
Now, you have to explain this to me, the city slicker here. How do you protect a lot of the cattle, when it's bitterly cold outside, minus 30, minus 40 degrees, and if you don't have a barn big enough to house, maybe 5 or 10,000 head?
Yeah, so there's no need to bring cattle indoors in the winter, like not beef cattle. Um, Chickadees and wild bison and deer and all sorts of animals spend the whole year outside, including winter. And so, if you manage your cattle properly, they need to have a proper fat cover. They need to go into winter in good physical condition, and they need to have protection from wind. So we put up wind breaks or have natural wind breaks like trees, and then they need to have good access to water, drinking water, and a full belly of food. The rumentation uh, process, or the fermentation process in the rumen, is a heat generating process. So if they've got a full belly, they've got a furnace in their stomachs keeping them warm.
So how old is the average cow before it's taken to market?
In the commercial industry, the average cattle are between the ages of 15 and 18 months old, typically when they're brought to slaughter. And then in the grass-fed direct market, they're about double that, about 30 months old.
Now, in the past, you've said that cattle serve the needs of the grass and soil and not the other way around. Can you really explain how grazing cattle is a benefit to the grass and soil?
Yeah, so ecosystems function as a system, and they need to have all of their parts or else they don't work. So it's the same way as, a car won't work without a transmission or without an engine or without a fuel tank. Ecosystems need all of their parts in order to function properly. And when the glaciers came by, they scraped off all the topsoil in this area of North America. And bison and herds of large ruminants rebuilt that topsoil. So the grasses evolved specifically with grazers, and they have a symbiotic relationship where the cattle need the grass and the grass needs the cattle. There's different types of grasses and with different types of growing competitive strategies. And the act of grazing changes the structure of the canopy of grass and allows different species to flourish. So you actually get a lot of biodiversity as well.
I read years ago that pasture land can actually withstand forest fires. Is that true?
Yeah, grasses, most of their roots are underground. Most of their system is underground, and so they're able to withstand flooding and drought and fires quite well, and they can bounce back really well. So the big thing that we try to do is have healthy grass and healthy soil, so that when you get a big deluge of rain, you're able to absorb that rain and have very little runoff. And when you get if you had a fire, you would have big energy reserves underground, so the grass can bounce back and grow really quickly.
Now, Ben, many cattle ranchers say that cattle are nutrient recyclers. Would you agree with that? And if so, why?
Yeah, so cattle, they do a great thing. They eat foods that humans can't eat. So specifically grasses. If you have a pasture or a hill or a forest, you can put cattle in there. They'll eat those grasses that are completely inedible to humans and form human edible calories. So without destroying or damaging, but in fact benefiting that environment, cattle are able to produce food while making that environment better. And also we have crops that are grown like wheat and barley. And those ones, if they're used for human consumption, that's great. And sometimes you'll get situations, frost or hail, or it's too wet to harvest. There's different things that can decrease the quality of those foods down to what we're called feed quality, where they're not human edible consumption. And so those can be used with cattle rather than let them go to waste. You can feed them to cattle and they'll recycle those nutrients and convert them again back into human edible calories.
Now, can you share with our viewers how grazing protects land areas against invasive species of plants?
Yeah, so different plants have different competitive strategies. So, for example, some grow really well in hot weather, some grow really well in cold, some grow really well in dry, and some grow really well in wet. And what cattle do when they graze is they'll level off. So, if there's, for example, early growing plants, if you just didn't put cattle in there, the early growing, tall growing plants would take over the field and you would end up with them out competing everything else. And you'd have a monoculture, which meaning just one species of plants growing in that field. And when you get cattle in, they'll graze off the early ones, the early growing plants, which is fine. And then you get some later growing plants, and then cattle will graze those later growing plants off. And then next year you've got the early growing plants coming back in. So you're having a cycle of different types of things growing together.
Now, you talked earlier about selling your meat directly to consumers here, Ben. Can you share with us the benefits of grazing grass-fed cattle over cattle from a feedlot?
I wouldn't really want to compare like saying one's better than the other, but there's differences. So the grass-fed cattle, they take longer to produce. It's slower. Some people say that it's more flavorful. It's a little bit more, it can be more expensive to produce. They're raised in a nature-based system. So if that's something that you're interested in, they're grazed kind of year-round. They're not brought into a confined feeding situation. So it's just a kind of a personal preference on what people would like.
Now, we often hear advertising and the difference between Canadian versus American beef products. Can you share with us the big difference between the same product, but from two different nations?
The saying sort of goes, the farther north you go, the higher quality the beef is. We grow a lot better crops here. Like we're able to grow alfalfa better because we have cool nights. They just don't get those kind of cool nights in the United States. So we grow really high quality alfalfa, and of course a lot of other things where the cattle don't have to worry about overheating. So they're able to become really fat without being in trouble of overheating. So I think those are probably the two big factors that allow us to grow the ideal, the best beef in the world is having cattle that are able to finish at AAA or prime quality with grasses that were grown locally.
Now, Ben, is there anything else you want to chat with us about in regards to raising cattle to be successful?
Yeah, I would say that the most important thing to do is to try if you want to be a producer. As someone who's new to the industry, it's important for people to know that you don't have to be born into an inheritance in order to have a ranch or in order to be in agriculture. You just need to get your foot in the door and try really hard and be willing to fail and be willing to take risks. And I would say that to consumers, the regular people, it's your product in the end. You're the ones that are buying it. You're the ones that are eating it. And so it's your say on how it's produced, and it's your say in what you want. And so your dollar is your vote, and you buy what you want us to produce, and we're a team sort of in that together.
Ben Campbell is the recipient of the Alberta Northwest Territory region of Canada's Outstanding Young Farmers Program. Ben, thanks a lot for joining us today from Black Diamond, Alberta.
Thanks for having me.